At Blinds.com, it's not just about window treatments. It's about you, your style, your space, your way. Whether you DIY or want the pros to handle it all, you'll have the confidence of knowing it's done right. From free expert design help to our 100% satisfaction guarantee, everything we do is made to fit your life and your windows. Because at Blinds.com, the only thing we treat better than windows is you. Visit Blinds.com now for up to 45% off site-wide, plus a professional measure at no cost. Rules and restrictions apply.
Chronic migraine, 15 or more headache days a month, each lasting 4 hours or more, can make me feel like a spectator in my own life.
Botox, onabotulinum toxin A, prevents headaches in adults with chronic migraine. It's not for those with 14 or fewer headache days a month. It's the #1 prescribed branded chronic migraine preventive treatment.
Prescription Botox is injected by your doctor. Effects of Botox may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away, as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness can be signs of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Side effects may include allergic reactions, neck and injection site pain, fatigue, and headache. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Don't receive Botox if there's a skin infection. Tell your doctor your medical history, muscle or nerve conditions, including ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects.
Why wait? Ask your doctor, visit BotoxChronicMigraine.com or call 1-800-44-BOTOX to learn more.
Hello, this is Simon Brew. I'm the editor of Film Stories magazine, and a very warm welcome to the Film Stories podcast. Don't forget, if you really like this podcast, I've got a Patreon as well you can donate to.
I don't tip.
Come with me.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
In movies that had stories.
That the story just sucks them in.
This is just the beginning.
Stories. We would be honored if you would join us.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to Film Stories with Simon Brew. I am Simon Brew. As always, it's absolutely everything you need to know about me. The aim of the podcast was given away by the title. I'm here to talk of the stories of films, and I tend to talk about development stories, production stories, marketing stories, release stories, stories of consumer electronics products that are supposed to make movie watching easier, not quite going to plan. The films that I tend to cover on this podcast are lean more towards the mainstream than anything else. They're films I'm invested in or interested in to some degree. I try really hard not to do snark. I try really hard not to punch down. This podcast is a celebration of cinema and a real appreciation that somehow films manage to get made. Film Stories is also a very proud part of the Film Stories podcast network, a network of over 50 shows now covering all sorts of film, TV and gaming stuff. If you just do a search for Film Stories podcast network, hopefully you'll find more things to entertain your ears. Hopefully this is entertaining your ears as well, but I'm not going to ask because I don't want to push my luck. Instead, I'm going to get on with the first of the two film stories I'm going to talk about in this episode, and I'm going back to the early 1990s, to the infancy of Quentin Tarantino, for a story that's pretty well known. But it's the bit at the back end of this story that really, really turns my head. Here's a clip from the trailer from the movie. I'll come to the tale the other side of this.
Face! No! Put the gun down!
Here are your names. Mr. White, Mr. Blonde, Mr. Pink.
Why am I Mr. Pink?
Who cares what your name is?
Yeah, that's easy for you to say. You're Mr. White. You have a cool sounding name.
Let's go to work.
Well, I don't know why I came here tonight. I got the feeling that something ain't right.
What happens if the manager won't give you the diamonds?
Cut off one of his fingers. The little one.
I'm so scared in case I fall over the chair. And I'm wondering how I'll get down the stairs.
They hadn't done what I told them not to do.
1992's Reservoir Dogs, the film that put Quentin Tarantino on the map, but also the film that you could not legally buy on video cassette in the UK for 2-3 years after its initial release. Let's get into the story of Reservoir Dogs, written and directed by Quentin Tarantino and starring, you probably know, Harvey Keitel, Tim Roth, Chris Penn, Steve Buscemi, Lawrence Teeny, Michael Madsen. Who else do you have? Eddie Bunker in there, Kurt Baltz, Randy Brooks, David Steen, and Stephen Wright as the voice of DJ K. Billy. So it's fairly well known that the Quentin Tarantino origin story, and this is right in the heart of it, saw him working at a video store in California. That video store was called Video Archives, and he sat there writing screenplays. And some of those screenplays he had some luck with. I'll be name-checking True Romance, Natural Born Killers a little bit later. But for the purposes of this story, there was one that he wrote in particular that he realised, well, he wrote it knowing it could be made for a very modest price. It could be made for about $30,000. He could actually direct that himself. He could could he raise the money to film it in 16mm, perhaps black and white, but at least get a film that he's directed out into the world? And so this the first script was said to have written in October 1990. He handwrites his scripts as well. He's talked about this a lot. He also has his own podcast that sometimes sits below mine on the UK podcast chart. I just thought I'd mention that. Yeah, I'm sure he's very, very worried. But it was a friend of his, Lawrence Bender, who said, you know what, there's more to this script than a $30,000 movie. And Tarantino's just like, okay, yeah. And the path was set to trying to raise $1 million or $2 to do it with a bit more size to it, really. Not on 16mm, on 35mm, to be able to shoot it in colour, to get this film out into the world. And over the ensuing 6-8 months, started all coming together. So, I'm going to zip actually straight to June of 1991 because this story moves so fast that within, 8 months of writing the script, Tarantino had been accepted into the Sundance Institute Directors Workshop. And so he wasn't too far away from shooting the movie at this point. And he took some actors along, and not all of the judges at that Sundance workshop were particularly on the side of the film, but Tarantino has always said that it was invaluable, really, the advice he got from Terry Gilliam. So Terry Gilliam was there and offering mentoring and support. Another director there at the point, John Amiel. Did he do Copycat? John Amiel also offering support. But it was Gilliam who was finishing up The Fisher King who gave Tarantino the vital advice. So he asked Gilliam, how do I do the film? And Gilliam said, what you have to understand as a director is you don't have to do everything. That your job is to hire talented people who can do lots of the other jobs on the film. So you hire a cinematographer who can get the look and the quality of the image that you're after. You get a costume designer who can get you the colours and can get you the clothing that you need. And, the flamboyance sometimes, as Tarantino once said. Your job, Gilliam explained to Tarantino, is articulating to them what you want on the screen. Well, it was a light bulb moment for Tarantino. He's talked about it in lots of interviews, in that he could suddenly wrap his head around how to direct a feature film. Now he knew he didn't have to do all of that stuff. There was a way that he could push this forward. The coming together of the film, though, was not without challenges, not least in the casting department. So the original casting, for instance, Reservoir Dogs, I'm sure if you're listening, watching, you're relatively familiar with this, but you've got this bunch of characters, Mr. White, Mr. Orange, Mr. Blonde, Mr. Pink, Mr. Blue, Mr. Brown. And the setup of the film is they're reuniting after a botched diamond robbery. But it's quite a big cast, really, for an independent film that was going to cost in the end, $1 million? $2 million at best. That was all they could really hope to raise, probably less than that. So you go through some of the original casting options that they were looking at for the film. Well, Tarantino knew he was going to be in it. He was down as Mr. Pink at one point. He would end up being Mr. Brown. Steve Buscemi, and I'll come to how he got involved in a second. Well, could he be Nice Guy Eddie? That would go to Chris Penn in the end. Lawrence Bender, there's your producer. He could have been Nice Guy Eddie as well, couldn't he? James Woods was famously sent the script, and his agent turned it down without showing it to his client. His client, once he saw the final film and realised what had happened, duly fired said agent. Michael Madsen came in. He auditioned for Mr. Ping. Samuel L. Jackson, Ving Rhames, who obviously both go on to work with Tarantino, were both close to the film at one point. Robert Forster was said to have auditioned. There was a newspaper report, and only one that I could find, I tracked it down via the AFI website, that listed Christopher Walken in the cast at one point as well, but that was never to be, really. The finance was fluctuating as well. Again, it wasn't going to cost very much to make, but they still needed to raise that money. That they didn't have $1 million lying around in their back pocket. And so the break they needed was to get a name. If they could attract a name to the film, well, it might grease some of the wheels. So Lawrence Bender and Quentin Tarantino both wanted Harvey Keitel to take on the role of Mr. White. Now, Mr. White, in terms of screen time and days shooting, wasn't that huge a role. I mean, it's a very ensemble movie, but it was the kind of juicy role that an actor might really like to get their teeth into. They didn't have a direct link, or so they thought, to Harvey Keitel, but they did have an indirect one, because this is how the movies work sometimes. This is why I love doing these little film stories. That Lawrence Bender at this point happened to be taking acting classes, and the acting class was being led by a man called Peter Flor. Now, Peter Flor was discussing with Tarantino and Lawrence Bender, well, who do you want in your film? And amongst the names mentioned to them, Harvey Keitel. Well, Peter Flor, by his ex-wife, had a link to Harvey Keitel. And so the script was passed around, got to Keitel. Harvey Keitel read it. This was the era he was doing, The Piano, Bad Lieutenant. He read it and he loved it. But he didn't just want to be in it. He was going to help get this made. That he would also take on, if wanted, a producer role on the film. That might help grease some of the wheels as well. Furthermore, he put up a little bit of money too to basically put on a New York casting session for the movie. That it was Keitel. Keitel had been working on Thelma and Louise for Ridley Scott, and that's where he come across Michael Madsen. So he recommended Michael Madsen, for instance. Chris Penn sees Harvey Keitel's interested. It's just like, all right, now I'm interested. And Keitel's name attracts more funding. So the budget goes from the original $30,000, then they got it to about $100,000 to $1.5 million. Absolute zero, really, in the scheme of modern movies. However, for what Tarantino was looking to do, well, all of a sudden, it could be done. Now, even as he was talking about the film, and even as he was telling stories of it, he was planning what he was going to do next as well. There was this idea called Pulp Fiction that he was looking to shoot in the summer of '93, and that one was going to be 3 films for the price of 1, and he could use some of the Reservoir Dogs cast, but we'll come to David Duchovny, incidentally, auditioned. He was linked to it for a while, and the cast came together. That Keitel, Tim Roth, Michael Madsen, Chris Penn, Steve Buscemi, who came via the New York route as well. That's how they got him into the film. And I mean, it's interesting looking at the legacy of it as well, that the writing of the Harvey Keitel role would be quite influential on independent film going forward. That you look at a film like Good Will Hunting, and Ben Affleck and Matt Damon wrote that film and won Oscars for writing that film as well. But they looked at the Reservoir Dogs model and figured they needed to write into the Good Will Hunting script a juicy role for a name actor. A supporting role wouldn't take much time, but a good supporting role. And they did it because of Reservoir Dogs, lured Robin Williams to Good Will Hunting. Good Will Hunting wins his Oscar for that film, big hit. But, that was the impact of Reservoir Dogs casting. July 1991 then, in Los Angeles, a 5-week shoot gets underway. A very, very hot Los Angeles, it should be noted at that point. And Tarantino was not awash with resources to work with when shooting the film. In fact, most of the film was shot in the same empty building. That top location scout work, they found an empty building where they could use a couple of different rooms in different ways. So, for instance, a room towards the top of the building would double up as the apartment of Mr. Orange, Tim Roth. But The main use of the building used to be a mortuary. And so, I mean, you look around in the background, there might be one or two clues to that. Almost all of the film was shot indoors at this location in the midst of a very, very hot Los Angeles summer. The location was not particularly well ventilated either. And then you bring in the huge lights or the very hot lights that are required for shooting a film, and the place was heating right up. Tim Roth told a story about the fake blood used in Reservoir Dogs was, I mean, it was basically turned into glue when it heated up, and he found himself stuck to the floor. There was also, it's worth noting, the costumes weren't on the cool side. They were hardly walking around in Bermuda shorts and t-shirts. They had to wear suits with these heavy lights on. I mean, it wasn't the most comfortable of places to shoot a film. Also, the first week was problematic. That Lawrence Teaney who plays Joe, was getting the wrong side of people's nerves. It was a very, very difficult first week with a lot of arguments and to and fro. There's lots of stories as to why Lawrence Tierney was how he was that you can go and find. But the bottom line here is at the end of the first week, Tarantino just fired him and earned a round of applause for doing so. He would change his mind in the end and bring him back in to finish the bits of the film, but Tierney was winning himself very few friends at all. In terms of the bit of the film that they didn't have to shoot, well, that was the robbery itself. That, as much as Reservoir Dogs is centred around a heist, the idea, the gimmick, I wouldn't call it gimmick actually, but the core idea is you don't see the heist. You see a bit of the before, you see the after of it as well. And it was a twofold choice there. So on the one hand, they just couldn't afford to film it. They didn't have the budget to do it if Tarantino wanted to. Maybe they could have gone and rattled tins, don't know. But also, Tarantino didn't necessarily want to. That he liked the ambiguity of it all, really, of not seeing the main event that's being talked about and seeing kind of like the responses around it. There was a lot made of the ending of Reservoir Dogs as well, in regards shooting and how many shots, and I'm very, very spoiler light. A little bit of that ambiguity was contributed to by all I will say, without spoiling the film, there was a slight misfire of a squib at the end that just added to a tiny bit of that confusion. The film was ready to go into edit by September of 1991, and it was edited by the late great Sally Menker, and she would work with Tarantino right through until her death. And by the end of 91, Tarantino's star was rising. That there was some word of mouth to this as well. That he and Lawrence Bender had formed a production company called A Band Apart, but also an early screening ahead of festival debut and things like that had gone well, that there was real word of mouth. And Danny DeVito and Stacey Sher were running a company called Jersey Films, and they wanted to get to Tarantino fast. They duly did so. And by December 1991, with Reservoir Dogs still a long way away from a wide release in the US, Jersey Films had inked a deal with Tarantino for his next picture, which would become Pulp Fiction. For Reservoir Dogs, though, let's go back to that. It debuted at the Sundance Film Festival on January the 21st, 1992, and it went into that festival with word of mouth already building on the movie, that there was a feeling this is going to be the hit of the festival. It's going to walk out with loads of awards, that there'd been reports of an early screening that had just fueled interest in the movie, just an industry screening. And Tarantino went to Sundance with an inkling. There might be awards coming my way. This is my debut as a director. He'd sold script at this point. True Romance had sold. But, he might have thought that there were awards coming. He might have been told there were awards coming. Awards at this stage were not coming at all. Walked out of Sundance empty-handed and with some very, very divisive responses to the film. That Sundance premiere, and I go very, very spoiler light again, and so there is a sequence involving an ear where you don't see anywhere near as much as you think you see. Again, you could do that on that kind of budget. The reviews coming out of Sundance, well, originally they were good. I mean, some of them were really, really, really good. Some of them were very, very pushed back on the violence of it. Tarantino's writing and the conversations in his characters, they came in for some praise. But, people like Roger Ebert, who were reviewing at that point, weren't going head over heels for the film. And the violence was coming in already for a lot of trouble. I think Wes Craven gave an interview where he said he watched the film and walked out, just a month or two later. Really liked Tarantino, but just couldn't handle the violence. It's the Bambi effect is the interesting thing with Reservoir Dogs. It always was that it's what you don't see and what you're feeling. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the first Saw film, far less violent than you think, but it's your brain filling in the gaps. And as such, that kind of contributes to the legend a little bit. What happened off the back of Sundance? I mean, it had secured US distribution. That was a big key thing. That I think it was Miramax putting it out in the US. Here in the UK, it was snapped up by Polygram, and Polygram is we're coming to, because boy, did it have a bit of a battle with the film. And so it was in October 1992 that it gets its release in US cinemas. It's not made it to the UK yet. And there's a big Seattle Times interview I tracked down where Tarantino's addressing the fact that people are walking out of the film. And he had screened a few times at this point, and he just said it happens at every single screening. For some people, the violence or the rudeness of the language is a mountain they can't climb, he said. And he said, that's okay. It's not their cup of tea, but I am affecting them. I wanted that scene, what scene, to be disturbing. But there was some analysis in some of the reports at the time that were making the note. It wasn't actually as graphic as you think. But still, I mean, for all the noise that had been made about Reservoir Dogs, it was released by Miramax on 19 screens in the US on the weekend of the 23rd to the 25th of October. Its screen average was $7,781, not the highest in the chart. And the highest in the chart that week went to the Robert Redford directed film A River Runs Through It, which was playing on more screens, playing on 130 screens and doing a $12,000 screen average. There wasn't the point I'm trying to make, there wasn't an early sign that Reservoir Dogs was about to catch fire, that it picks up $147,000 on its opening weekend. Again, a limited platform release. The plan wasn't it was going to go onto 2,000 screens straight away. On its second weekend, it went up to 61 screens, but the screen average dropped to $3,500. The Lover was on 8 screens, which, I mean, a lot of controversy around that film at the time. Had a screen average of $22,000. A River Runs Through It was on nearly 800. Its screen average was higher as well. And so you go to week 3 and Reservoir Dogs interest in it is waning. The screen count on its third week went down slightly. The box office was down 20%. And, I mean, it was just trickling out of cinemas. In fact, you go to the initial US release of the film, what did it do? About $2 million at the US box office. It didn't do much at all. And so ordinarily, cinema is awash with acclaimed independent films that make a noise and then kind of disappear. What I believe, that other opinions are available, what really helped ignite Reservoir Dogs was what happened to it here in the UK. So let's go forward to the start of 1993, and this is where it all just starts the legend starts to build, that in January 93 Reservoir Dogs got its release in UK cinemas. It got some terrific reviews as well, and it passed uncut. No, there wasn't any mad controversy beyond here's that violent film that people in America were talking about, but it went uncut, did decent money at UK cinemas, but nothing to send it into the stratosphere. It was when the video release came around, though, that really things took hold. Now, there's a really tragic and horrific backdrop to what was going on around the conversations of video releases in the UK in 1993. The murder of a small boy, James Bolger, and important I say his name, a really horrific crime, And the UK tabloids at that point were vehement about linking this to videos and to films. In particular, there's a film called Child's Play 3 that was put on the front page of one of the UK newspapers, and that was said to have been this big influence on this horrific crime. What it brought into focus, though, was certainly the conversation that the tabloids brought up was the violence that was available on videos that people could get in the home. There was a Belgian film around at the same time called Man Bites Dog, a really horrific film. But because that was subtitled and a very, very small audience, that sort of got through. But it was mentioned a lot of times, but went through uncut, I believe. Reservoir Dogs, though, had this scene, this scene that was being heavily talked about, that involves an ear. And as much as it had got through uncut on a cinema release, the video release was now going to be slightly different, because James Furman was the head of the British Board of Film Classification, the BBFC here in the UK, give films a certificate, and he was now minded to clamp down on violence in videos. There's a Video Recording Act in 1984, and the whole Video Nasties era you can read about in the UK as well, that had seen lots of films. Ken Russell's The Devils, you still can't get uncut here in the UK, for instance, as a result of that 1984 Act. Lots of films were not available in the home, or certainly it took a long time for them to become available in the home. But Polygram didn't know all this was necessarily lying ahead at this point. It submitted the video for certification as usual, but it was advised that a decision would be delayed. It wasn't told you weren't going to get a certificate. It was told the decision is going to be delayed. It's really important to note that the movie was not banned. It was never banned. In much the same way Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange wasn't banned. It was a case of Kubrick withdrew that film. In the case of Reservoir Dogs, it was in limbo while the BBFC was addressing the Video Recordings Act, and the government was as well, and working out what to do with this film. In the end, there were changes made in Parliament. I think it was the Criminal Justice and Public Order Bill was introduced in 1993 in Parliament. This would make amendments to the 1984 Video Recordings Act under the then Conservative government of John Major was Prime Minister at that point. And the changes to the Video Recordings Act came in 1994 as well. So all of this time, while legislation and changes were going through, Reservoir Dogs was sat in limbo. So we're already like a year-ish along the line. But what was happening was Polygram was reaping some degree of benefit of that, because word of mouth hadn't stopped spreading about Reservoir Dogs. And reports had been popping up, and Empire Magazine, in fairness, really banged the drum on this, that you couldn't get it on video. It's just like, there's nothing that inclines people more to watch a film than being told they can't watch a film. And so Reservoir Dogs, demand for it in cinemas started to rise. And rise and rise. In fact, in the end, it got a full theatrical re-release in the UK in 94. But the bit that really saw it started to bubble up was the midnight screenings that started happening. So I live in Birmingham in the UK. Every Friday, Saturday night, alongside The Exorcist, which you also couldn't get on video at the time, there was a midnight screening of Reservoir Dogs. And then another one. They're popping up around the UK. And the conversation around the film was, it's almost like this thing you weren't supposed to be able to see. Well, I've seen it. Have you seen it? And the word of mouth started to build. And this cult following that I think went slightly beyond a cult following was building up. Interest in the film was going up as well. Interest in the soundtrack was also soaring at this point. That Tarantino's soundtrack to Reservoir Dogs included clips of dialogue for the film. Well, people weren't really doing that, were they? Not usually. He'd do it again in Pulp Fiction, of course. But in Reservoir Dogs, it's just like, oh, okay. And also the jukebox in Reservoir Dogs, full of tunes that suddenly found themselves back in the public consciousness as a result of the film. And so it got this fast-track way, really, to, again, just slightly beyond cult status. Helped, too, by the fact that in America, you could buy it on video. You could buy it on Laserdisc, and that was crucial in America. I'm not condoning this. It was just one of those things that because there was a Laserdisc available, that meant high-quality counterfeit copies of Reservoir Dogs were being sold in the UK that had been ripped. It wasn't ripped in those days, but were taken from the Laserdisc source. So it wasn't the back of the head in someone's cinema. There was actually a decent source to the picture, and there was something about watching an illicit copy of this film that the BBFC wouldn't let you have. So went the story on video in the UK. I mean, for Polygram, it must have wished it could have got the film stuck for a little bit longer. But eventually, the fresh legislation came through in 1994. And the video release of Reservoir Dogs would be not too far behind. It's worth noting, though, that True Romance jumped the queue, that Warner Brothers had backed True Romance, directed by Tony Scott. And Tony Scott had famously changed the chronology of the screenplay. And, I mean, True Romance is a great film. But Warner Brothers, when it was putting True Romance out in the video to buy market, stickers on the front, the first Tarantino available to buy. The Tarantino effect was rippling as well, even while all of this contention with Reservoir Dogs was going on, because in 1994 Pulp Fiction comes out, and for a while there was like, are you going to be able to buy Pulp Fiction on video in the UK? And so, I mean, two films, Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, two films people were desperately wanting to see, both huge successes. Tarantino, I mean, studios then, it's just like, what Tarantino scripts have we got? And so not only does Pulp Fiction go through, Warner Brothers puts True Romance through. Oliver Stone picks up Natural Born Killers. I'm going to tell that story another time. Pretty much guts the script, whole of the tale behind that. Tarantino's hired to do script write on Crimson Tide. He'd done a little bit of script rewriting as well. And he was the name on Hollywood's lips. And part of that myth came from, or certainly part of that legend, came from the fact that the UK had helped really ignite interest in the film. This movie you wanted to see, but you couldn't see. It's almost an anticlimax in the end when the film then comes out on video in May of 1995. Pulp Fiction also comes out on video, and you know, the story almost comes to an end, apart from the fact that, I mean, the old cliche, the genie's out the bottle. And so Tarantino's career is launched. Even at the point I'm recording now, 2025, I mean, 4K steelbook editions of Reservoir Dogs released into the market. There was nearly a neat ending to this story as well, in that Tarantino, at the point I'm recording, has not decided what his 10th and final film as director will be, 11th if you count Kill Bill as two films. But he's stuck himself to this rule that he's only going to direct 10 films. As he told Screen Rant, I think it was in 2021, there was a little bit of time where he considered for his final film doing a remake of Reservoir Dogs, perhaps with a bit more resources. But as he worked out, it's just like, why on earth do I need to do that? Launched his career, launched this aura around him as well, and didn't half help the sale of pirate videos in the UK.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Attention all small biz owners. At the UPS Store, you can count on us to handle your packages with care. With our certified packing experts, your packages are properly packed and protected. And with our pack and ship guarantee, when we pack it and ship it, we guarantee it. Because your items arrive safe or you'll be reimbursed. Visit the upsstore.com/guarantee for full details. Most locations are independently owned. Product services, pricing, and hours of operation may vary. See Center for details. The UPS Store. Be unstoppable. Come into your local store today.
And that brings me to the halfway point of this latest episode of Film Stories. I'm going to do a couple of parish notices and then get on with the rest of the episode. Firstly, if you like this podcast, I do actually have a Patreon, patreon.com/SimonBrew. All contributions very, very welcomed. You get the podcast early and ad-free pretty much every time. You find out what I'm up to behind the scenes as well. There are discussion boards there you're very welcome to join in with too. So thank you to everybody who's backing me there. It costs nothing to give an independent podcast a subscribe at your podcast home of choice, and ideally a hugely positive review as well. We're all fighting, you might have noticed, very celebrity fronted podcasts in the movie space at the moment, so anything you can do to give an independent like this a lift is massively appreciated. Thank you to everybody who does so. Film Stories is also live events and print magazine, so I'm briefly going to tell you about that because the new issue of Film Stories magazine is about to go up for pre-order. It's our flagship 168-page film magazine. Imagine that, a print film magazine, 168 pages. You can find it and back issues at store.filmstories.co.uk. You can also find Film Junior magazine there, which is our print film magazine for under 15s. Working on another issue of that that's not far behind too. And I also have live events. That it's probably too late for the live event on Wednesday the 17th of September, the week this goes out, 2025, in Birmingham in the UK. I'm doing a Film Stories live show at the Midlands Arts Centre. On the 3rd of October 2025, I'm also putting on a preview screening in Birmingham in the UK of the film I Swear, and I'm delighted that writer-director Kirk Jones is coming along to talk to us after that as well. You can find tickets for those at Mac Birmingham, macbirmingham.co.uk. Just search for Film Stories there and all the events will pop up. Now, though, I'm going to move to the second of the two stories I'm telling in this particular episode, and it's a piece of consumer electronics I'm talking about that was designed to be a rival, a companion to the DVD disc movie format. I'm going to set this up with a very, very enthusiastic shop advert, and I'm going to tell you the story of it the other side of this.
If you're tired of paying late fees for video rentals or paying for movies you didn't have time to watch, check out DIVX at Circuit City. Only DVD players with DIVX play DVD movies, DIVX movies, and audio CDs. DIVX movies are only $4.49 each, and you never have to return them or pay late fees. This RCA DVD player with DIVX is only $349.99, and get any 5 DIVX movies free after rebate. Plug into DIVX at Circuit City.
Consumer electronics is littered with format wars. We had Betamax versus VHS. We had HD DVD versus Blu-ray. But how many of you remember DVD versus Digital Video Express, or DIVX? Let's get into the story of that. For us in the UK now, I think probably for most people worldwide as well, DIVX has a very different meaning in 2025, when I'm recording this, to when it first came to prominence, really, all the way back in the later 1990s. In fact, I'd suggest many people in the UK, I'm in the UK, wouldn't really have heard of it at all. But there was a period of time where the DIVX disc was a challenger to DVD. There's some argument about whether it complemented DVD, sat side by side, but it was a point where it was putting confusion into the marketplace by having two digital video disc-ish products at the same time. So let's wind this back. VHS, dominant format for watching films at home throughout the 80s and most of the 90s. Betamax was always said to be technically the better. As such, Betamax lost. That's the rules. VHS then, it was coming to a point where we were buying CDs more than we were cassette tapes, and the move towards a digital film format. Well, there was Laserdisc, and Laserdisc was the connoisseur. The film fan with deep pockets could have a Laserdisc player, basically. They weren't cheap, but they were a step above, several steps above the quality you got from a VHS tape. However, something like CD, but for movies, was inevitable. And I mean, the origins of DivX roots go back to an American electronics chain called Circuit City. Now, Circuit City never made it to the UK, but there was a point in America where they were commonplace. It's like going to Curry's here in the UK, something like that. And also, alongside this, if we go to the early late 90s, the emergence of a DVD disc format, digital versatile disc, was causing headaches for the movie industry, because for years there had been this absolutely regimented way you got your films out into the market. If you made a blockbuster film, there was this model. So I don't know, let's take an example, Terminator 2. That Terminator 2 in the UK, we got it slightly later than the US. I think it was August 1991. It came out as cinemas in the UK. Then if you wanted to watch it again outside of a cinema, you had to wait for the video rental. The video rental didn't turn up until February 1992. So what's that? 6-7 months after the cinema release. Then if you wanted to buy the film to own, you either bought an X-rental tape. This is memory lane, isn't it? Or you had to wait for the sell-through video, smaller box, which came, I think it was October of 1992. So there was this pattern really that lasted 15 months between a film being in cinemas and you being able to walk into a shop and buy a brand new copy for yourself at a reasonable price. For the studios, 3 bites of the cherry. It was often said, certainly for smaller films, that the cinema release was the trailer for the much more profitable video release. And there was kind of a status quo here. Which cliche shall I go for? A boat they didn't necessarily want rocking. There was the occasional film, Disney was good at this, or massive blockbusters, or certainly around Christmas, where it was just, it skipped rental, went straight onto video to buy. We even had those in the UK, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, Three Men and a Little Lady, Batman Returns did, I mean, I could go on. But the DVD format that was coming through was a very potent threat to cinema release, rental release, sell-through release. And all of a sudden, there were meetings taking place. As much as DVD went on to become huge, there was so much uncertainty over what would happen in the mid-90s. And I mean, it turned home entertainment upside down, but nobody really knew that was going to happen. So DVD launched in Japan at the end of 1996, rolled out into the US in March of 1997, hit the UK properly in March of 98, although lots of us were buying imported players at that point. And to help push DVD, early studios who adopted it, and this is relevant to the DIVX story, such as Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers was a huge advocate of DVD, started making their big titles as day-and-date releases. As such, that meant that once a film had run in cinemas, like Contact, for instance, the DVD would go straight on sale. No rental window at all. You pay it slightly, what, $25, was it? Something like that. You took the film home. And so you didn't have to wait for this rental window. Lethal Weapon 4 didn't have to wait for the rental window. Every film that Warner Brothers was putting out, no longer was there a rental window. Well, some studios weren't happy with the idea of that. And so it was in 1995 that Circuit City, and so this is still a year ahead of DVD properly launching, 2 years of it launching in the US. Circuit City entered into an agreement, I'm not making this up, with a law firm called Zifrin, Brittingham, Branca and Fisher, because history is littered with popular consumer electronics products that have been generated in part by a law firm. And the idea was looking at a rental-centric digital disc, a variant of DVD that would protect the rental model. And so at heart, I mean, I suppose the easiest way to explain it is a pay-per-view DVD disc. It would be the same size as a DVD, but different. And there was a story that suggested that Digital Video Express, as it was known, DIVX, was originally began as an idea for an encryption standard for DVD, as opposed to the rival format that it would ultimately become. Because Circuit City had, it had the stores. Internet shopping, not a big thing in 1995, folks. So you walked into a store if you wanted to buy something. Imagine that madness. So it had the stores. It could launch a format and get it across America. So that side of it, yeah, okay. You've still got to make a consumer want to go into the store to want to buy the technology, but, let's cross that bridge shortly. So what the technology required was, first of all, a telephone line. Now, this was radical, really. As much as cable television required a cable, the world wasn't yet at the point where it was dialing up to the World Wide Web from home via a modem that hogged your telephone line and made funny noises, pre-broadband, halcyon days. And so you had to connect this player to a telephone line. Well, people didn't like the idea of that. Was it going to hog the telephone line? Was it always going to be snooping on you? It's amazing the stuff we got upset about in the 90s that just implicitly came true, and now nobody cares. They should care perhaps, but nobody cares. So it required this line. And then the idea was that, say, DVDs were selling for $25, $30 in the US. How about a digital disc that sold for $4 to $5? You put the disc into, not a DVD player, but a DIVX player, look the same, but that notwithstanding. Press your play button, and then you've got 48 hours to finish watching from the point you press play. Exactly the model that digital rentals use now. You press play, the clock's ticking. Then, I mean, usually on the DivX disc, I think this was one of its many fatal errors, there were no extra features. But also, after 48 hours, the disc locked. Then, as a consumer, you had two choices, really. You could put it in the bin. I mean, again, we're in the 2020s when some awareness about the planet burning is a lot more commonplace. This was a format which was disposable, really, as much as stores would put in recycling bins and stuff like that. Part of the promotion was, when you're done with it, just chuck it, it's fine, unless you wanted to keep the film. In which case, if you wanted to watch it again, in fact, you had three options, really. You could dial into the mothership via your player and extend the rental, pay a little bit more. You had to set up an account in order to do this. That didn't go down well either. Again, commonplace now. Or you could, inverted commas, silver the disc. Assuming the studio would let you do it, the studios would have control over the pricing. You could pay a fee to make the disc silvered. I'm not sure silver is a verb, but we're sort of going with that now. What this meant is you could watch it for all time. So say you bought George of the Jungle, which was available on DivX. George of the Jungle is a film I really, really love. But you paid $4.50 for the initial disc. And then if you want to watch it forever, as you should, what was it? Another $20, $25. The disc is silvered. You could watch your George of the Jungle DivX for all time. In theory, there is a twist to that bit of the tale coming along. But the idea was that it looked to a consumer cheaper than a DVD. Also, to the studios, well, it protected that kind of model that they'd had. Cinema, rental, sell-through. Okay. Now, you couldn't put a DivX disc in a DVD player, so you're going to have to explain that to consumers, why that silver disc didn't work in that thing there. I mean, you could use a CD in a DVD player, so cross-compatibility was a thing. However, there was also the option, if you wanted, that you could buy a DivX gold disc. Now, again, not every studio made these available. Not every studio allowed you to, I hate using it as a verb, silver your disc. I mean, it's just wrong, isn't it? 90% of titles you could silver. I've got to move on from that. A gold disc was, as it sounds, if you want to buy the film outright, you buy the gold version, that's it. You can watch George of the Jungle forever, from day one. So that was your options, really. And as much as, I mean, so much explaining to get to that point. Now imagine explaining that to a consumer when it's side by side with the DVD format, which is buy that player, put that disc in, press play. No setting up an account, no phone line involved. No, do you want to extend the rental or anything like that? Once you've got the disc in your hand, that is it. Now, over time, DVD, there's the issue of disc rot and stuff like that, which I'm sure I'll come to at some other point. But the announcement formally that this was going to happen, that DivX was going to launch, was going to go into Circuit City stores and a couple of other chains, I think 2 or 3 chains picked it up, came in September 1997. And folks, let me tell you, it went down like a fart in a car. all those little niggles that I just told you about, the pushback was quite something. So the World Wide Web was building up here, and it's important to note this was happening in tandem. The AOL free trial discs were everywhere in 1997, and more of us were being able to dial up via a creaky modem to the World Wide Web and read a lot of consumer journalism, fan sites, publications that have been made by enthusiasts that were putting the professional stuff to shame. And on a lot of, I mean, there was an ecosystem of DVD sites in those early days as well. DVD File, the Digital Bits is still going, terrific site. The Big Picture DVD, and Home Theatre Forum. I mean, these were influential. The voices on them were influential. And most of the people editing and writing those sites did not like DivX at all. I mean, what was this madness? Is it going to hog your phone line? Not really, but you still had to dial in at least twice a month. You had to register this account. In so many ways, the technology was ahead of where we are now. But, I mean, people just weren't having it. So there's a piece of the website, E-Town, in September 1997, which I dug out, and it outlined these details that you got Matsushita, Zenith, Thompson making players. They cover quite a lot of brand names as well. Also, we learned that Digital Video Express had originally been called Zoom. It's no longer called Zoom. Wonder what we use Zoom for now. Now it was DivX, D-I-V-X, all capital letters, as opposed to the container file we know now, which is D, little I, little V, little big X, blah, blah, blah. So, as Etan noted at this point, there were people in the corner of the format. So Disney was there from day one. Now, Disney would actually take more time than most studios to wrap its head around the DVD format. Those of us who were there at the infancy of DVD, when Disney decided to go for it properly, its first wave of releases were hugely expensive and really poor, as opposed to now, when it really goes for it, But Disney was committed, and as E-Town reported, it wasn't just Disney. It said already Disney, Paramount, Universal and DreamWorks have signed on for DivX. And to a degree, why wouldn't they at that point? DVD was, I can't iterate this enough, DVD was no certainty. It was, nobody knew how quickly it was going to blast off, and this protected the rental side of it. So they've committed, E-Town said, to day and date releases with their VHS counterparts and to supply 1,000 catalogue discs. Anyone launching a games console or any consider will know in the end, eventually you've got to sell people the inverted commas software. The 1,000 catalogue titles was really, really important. Studios, as E-Town also noted, also liked the fact that the copy protection was deemed to be very, very tight on DivX. There are a couple of concerns about DVD. So this E-Town article gave a kind of state of a nation from a slightly DivX leaning way in the autumn of 1997. And it predicted this. Gazing into our dusty crystal ball, we see a two-level DVD industry. And it said the $25 sell-through and DivX rental titles. Just as there are rental-only VHS tapes that cost $100, that was the price that rental stores had to pay for the tapes, and others for $15, DVD will head in that direction. Well, it didn't. One thing we can guarantee, wrote E-Town, wasn't the most prescient article that site ever wrote. Enthusiasts will go ballistic about new DivX technology that makes their current players obsolete next year. Well, it did go ballistic, but not in a good way, really. And so it said, we make a suggestion to manufacturers, how about offering trade-ins and stuff like that? So there were some sensible ideas in there, but there was a feeling that DivX was going to take off. And it's worth noting that as much as there was pushback from the groundswell of upcoming enthusiast websites, there was still this kind of, I mean, there was so much big money behind it, so many big companies, much like AI at the moment, this ongoing assumption that AI is going to soar, whereas there are lots of us at the end of it go, is it? Anyway, that notwithstanding, the pushback kept coming and kept coming and kept coming. And in terms of the power of these groundswell of sites, this was the Ain't It Cool News era, where Hollywood was also really nervous of the power of an internet it didn't understand. The early days of Ain't It Cool News, never a site I particularly liked, and there's some stories behind the science. I won't go there at the minute. But it was deemed to have a lot of influence over the commercial performance of films like Speed 2 and Batman and Robin, for instance, in 1997. And studios were scared of it. And all of a sudden, the people behind DivX were seeing all of this pushback against its new movie disc format. And, I mean, they didn't have the control that they used to have. Also, the messaging was getting difficult because now it became clear that DivX hardware players required more technology within them, and so were going to cost consumers $100 more. So what Circuit City was now having to sell to a consumer was a more expensive player to buy much cheaper discs, but also discs that you would like throw away at the end of it. So if they were going on a strictly selling it on a kind of strictly this is cheaper kind of way, the hardware needed to at least be the same price as a DVD player. It couldn't attract a premium because those inclined for DVD would go nowhere near DivX. Because why would they? I mean, the format they want is cheap. There was all sorts of little muddles as well. And also cross-compatibility thing. You couldn't play a DivX disc on a DVD player, although DVDs would work on certain DivX players. And again, it needed to be simple messaging, and it wasn't. We go to the start of 1998, though, and this was the point where battle was going to commence. So DVD had been in the American marketplace for, about 9 months at this stage. And so at the start of each year, the Consumer Electronics Show takes place in Los Angeles. Big tech companies go there, show all like the massive tellies, the technology they want us to buy over the next year or two. And there was some unease about DivX, but nonetheless, they went and they exhibited there at a point where DVD was garnering all the headlines. And I mean, the headlines coming out of it weren't great. But also in February 1998, so just a few weeks later, the Digital Video Express team probably had their best day, because that was the stage where they were able to convince 20th Century Fox to add its name to the list of studios supporting the format. So if you look at who was involved, you had DreamWorks, you had Universal, 20th Century Fox in there, Paramount in there. You didn't have Sony, you didn't have Warner Brothers, but it was fracturing. But still, there were so many big titles that were going to potentially be on DivX, not just George of the Jungle, that this now felt like it had a little bit of a shot, because not all of these studios had committed to DVD. Fox would be quite late to DVD, for instance. The problem was that as much as the DivX team were pushing the idea that this could be a complementary format to DVD, that they could exist side by side, it was being seen as a rival. Because again, you go into a shop, there's one player that plays one kind of discs, there's another player that plays another kind of discs. Unless they're all working in the same player, you've got a bit of a problem there. And so this is why it was crucial, the rush to sign up as many movie studios to support each format, because in the end it was going to sell off the films. You know, Terminator 2 in 1992, when people went to the rental store, they knew they had to have a VHS player because they wanted to watch Terminator 2 at home. So kind of similar-ish idea working there. So, I mean, I dug back through a lot of the websites. Archive.org is a terrific site for going back into vintage websites. They do wonderful work. And there's a lot of old articles that you can find there that have been deleted from websites that are no longer with us. And you know, you go back to, say, the digital bits, which is still going 20, 30 years on. There's actually an article on there from March 1997 where the editor of that site, Bill Hunt, was very open about the fact that he wasn't a fan of DivX, but DivX demoed the player for him and demoed the software, and he wrote a really constructive article which is still available on his site. And it confirmed that prior to first use, you call DivX and give them your credit card number for billing purposes. Again, that was a big hurdle for people. And then the article, I mean, the article that Bill Hunt wrote criticised the video quality of the demo discs provided, but reconciled, I mean, they're just demo discs. Some early DVD demo discs were a problem. What was interesting, though, was that all DivX movies, he wrote, will feature pan and scan only, with English 5.1 surround sound as determined by the studios. So now when we buy a film on Blu-ray 4K, buy a download, it's widescreen. It's anamorphic widescreen. Pan and scan, and there'll be some people listening to this who don't know what it is when basically the film has to be re-edited to hit a 4:3 aspect ratio, the size of televisions. Really, through to the mid-90s, most of us had a 4:3 television as opposed to a widescreen one. Now you can't buy a 4:3 television, not that I can see. I haven't tried, and it's all widescreen. But for cinephiles, widescreen was key. So 20th Century Fox enjoyed a huge success in the early 1990s when it started releasing films on widescreen videos. So you get black bars on the screen on a 4:3 screen, but you saw all of the picture. And one of my favourite my favourite travesties of pan and scan, if you like, is if you go to Alien 3, not the film that many people love, but still, you go to Alien 3, there's a scene in that where the alien goes right up to the side of Sigourney Weaver's head, out comes the thing from its head, and blah blah blah, and it's all in one shot. On the video version, they have to pan across it, and you lose the impact of it being a single shot. So straight away, that was saying, if all of your films are going to be available on pan and scan, and virtually everything on DVD, although not all is going to be widescreen, you're losing the film fans. So who are you really going for there? Well, you're kind of going for the casual film rental fan. DivX discs also weren't going to have all these extra features that were going on DVDs, but does someone who just wants to watch a movie on a Friday night and not need like tons of IMDb trivia, do they care about that? Do they want all the extra features? Well, I mean, this was the argument. And there was this case, and I think there was something to it, that most film fans were just happy with a basic rental. However, DivX still had these problems. It hit the market second. It was more expensive. You had to give your credit card number. You had to hook your machine up to the phone. No matter how much a studio liked a format, in the end, it couldn't force it on consumers. Were you able to force a format on consumers, the Sega Dreamcast would rightly be regarded as the finest games console of all time, and would have sold tons. However, that ain't how the world worked. So casual film fans were being asked to pay more for the hardware. And also, when they went, the idea too of the DivX format was you wouldn't go to a massive consumer electronics shop to get your discs. You wanted to go to your local corner shop, your local newsagent, your local chemist, just a shop around the corner where you could buy a selection of these $4 or $5 discs. But they weren't stocking them. And so you go to the Bill Hunt article, and in there is kind of like almost like an email inbox where you get alerts of stores in your local area that have started carrying DivX discs. But not that many of those alerts went out because what they couldn't, they couldn't persuade, certainly in any quantity, small independent stores just to have a rack of these discs. They'd have video rentals in those stores or a few videos to buy, but they weren't taking DivX discs. Also, Circuit City's rivals, there's no way they were going to carry the format either. I mean, why would you want to benefit Circuit City if you're one of its competitors? So you couldn't go to another massive consumer electronics chain that was in direct competition and pick up either a player or disc. It was going to take a journey and a half just to get the discs back into your home. This was a problem. All of this then, and then the format officially launches. We haven't even got there yet, right? The format officially launches in June 1998, but it was running late. There were a couple of teething problems. And in the end, it launched a week after the announced date as well. But DVD was now, 15 months in and selling well in the US as well. I mean, DVD would explode, I would suggest, with the Matrix DVD, which came in 1999. That really gave it an extra leap. But it was still selling well in 1998. A Computer Retail Week report in June 1998, however, was just summing up the issues that DivX was having at the point it was launching. And it wrote, since its announcement last year, DivX has stirred a storm of controversy among retailers and DVD manufacturers. Computer Retail Week noted that nearly all US retailers have refused to sell the products because the technology's marketer, Digital Video Express, is backed by a rival. And so one or two had signed on, but most hadn't. There was Unhappiness too that this format was going to confuse the market and potentially might hurt DVD. But still, DivX, $100 million was allocated to the promotion of it. Yet it was falling short fairly quick. There was a promise of there are going to be 75 films for launch day, but there was 25, if that. And it wasn't a wide rollout in the end in June of 1998. That wouldn't follow until September 1998, when lots more players got out into the market, and it was, you've got to win the Christmas market. You've got to get your footprint in the upcoming Christmas sales. Otherwise, you're in trouble. Well, initially, sales were sluggish, down to single figures in certain stores, went 1 or 2 reports. Impossible to test the accuracy of those reports 30 years on. But they did get a stroke of luck, because demand for DVD was rising, but supply wasn't matching it. And so a shortage of DVD players in time for the Christmas market led to a rise in sales of DivX. Now, it's fair to assume DivX sales would have gone up anyway, but coming the other side of Christmas, around 500,000 DivX discs have been sold, 87-ish players described as DivX enhanced DVD players have been sold as well, 87,000 of those. And it wasn't a terrible result. I mean, in terms of market share, it was heading, about 20%-ish, something like that. Circuit City, though, in the background was, it was losing money on this. And heaven knows what happened to that law firm as well. It had been actively looking for other investors and partners in the autumn of 98, but no joy. It couldn't persuade Blockbuster Video to stock the discs either. That was another blow too. But around this time as well, there was an attempt to re-seize the initiative. And this was really quite something. So, noting the success of all of those DVD websites I was talking about before, suddenly, out of nowhere, a sprinkling of websites came up that were pro the DivX format. So there was one called Absolute DivX, which described itself as dispelling rumours. Another called DivX Myths, a fair assessment it billed itself as. DivXit was one. Great. DivX Country. But the one that I tracked down is called prodivx.com. And again, you can find it on archive.org. And I'm looking at its website here. And it says, where the facts are told and the decision is yours. And it's quite something. It reads, and I suspect this is what it was, of someone in a corporate office trying to do a fan site. And so the opening page of this apparently written in a spare room pro DivX site is, Happy New Year's, everyone, it says. This is a post on 26th of January 1999, so just after that Christmas. 1998 has been an incredible year for DivX. I've done some research in the past few days and have come across the DivX sales figures. Check out these numbers, presented almost PowerPoint style, with a list of bullet points and certain numbers highlighted in red. It looks like DivX has done it, says ProDivX. What an incredible national launch, and then backed up with a phenomenal Christmas season. There are a lot of people out there enjoying their DivX players. I am loving my Pro Scan. There's a sentence I've not read out before. And then, you believe it or not, this week I'm going to be updating the site with new trivia, getting rid of those coming soon pages. And then, how's this for a sign off? Have you ever read a fan site that ended with this? I wish everyone a great start to the new year and enjoy those $4.49 movies. Well, these were called out really quickly. And journalists did some research on this and tried to contact the editors of, let's just say, 2 or 3 of these pro DivX sites that suddenly appeared. They're like bot social media accounts, really. They never got responses to those queries. One of the sites just fairly quickly disappeared, actually. And the truth was, as they headed into the Consumer Electronics Show 1999, the writing was on the wall. That studios just weren't making the money out of DivX, whereas Warner Brothers was just making a fortune for backing DVD. And if there's something that turns the head of big national conglomerates and huge corporations, it's cash. Over the months, Paramount went to DVD, Fox went to DVD, Disney went to everybody went to DVD, because that's where the money was. And the mechanism by which people were buying and watching movies at home was changing fast. Also, the profits from DVD were smashing to smithereens the profits from VHS as well. And right through to, I think it was 2005, 2006 was the peak of DVD sales. That it said that the reason you got so many interesting indie films and risky films from studios as well, but in the late 90s and early 2000s, was they knew they lost money in cinemas. They would coin it in on DVD. And so in the end, the collapse of the DVD market has cost us a lot of really interesting films. That notwithstanding, the story here is DivX, and on June the 16th, 1999, the format had limped on for a few more months, but Circuit City decided to cut its losses. The studios had gone, sales were falling, losses were mounting, and Circuit City in the end had to absorb a $300 million loss, a bit more than that actually, on the whole format. It couldn't go it alone. It didn't have the partners in the end, and in the end, consumers spoke. They didn't want a rental service that kept connecting to a mothership to see how long you had left. Yeah, I mean, I'll just leave that there. How times change. The icing on the cake for those who had gone for the DivX format, who had bought their George of the Jungle or Eddie Murphy in Holy Man or the Talking Parrot film from DreamWorks, Paulie. At the point it was discontinued, the clock was ticking. And within 2 years of Circuit City discontinuing DivX players, well, by the summer of 99, players weren't on sale. Discs were being destroyed as well. Everything ripped off sale. Get this. If you had bought a DivX, and oh God, I'm going to use the verb again, and silvered the DivX disc, on June the 30th, 2001, it stopped working forever. So let's consider this. You spent, $400 on a player. You spent $30 on the film. Your player, because the server it needed to connect to verify your account was no longer active, would not play, your dedicated DivX player would not play any DivX disc at all. If you had bought the thing to buy and you hadn't claimed your refund by June of 2001, not only did you have no way of playing your copy of George of the Jungle, you couldn't get a refund on it either. Incredible, really. Other format wars, I mean, when VHS beat Betamax, you could still play your Betamax tapes, you just couldn't. But I've got a garage with HD DVD discs in it. I backed the wrong horse there. There's a wonder why consumers don't like format wars, why manufacturers don't like format wars. I just consider the whole irony of the DivX format, and the name DivX was taken for other purposes, for video container files and stuff like that. So there's a whole other use for it now. But that whole thing of you buy it and then you can't use your disc. I mean, the lessons that were learnt from it, it got to a point where it was listed as one of the 25 worst consumer electronics products of all time. But the irony isn't lost on me that the kind of model that it was trying to promote is exactly the kind of model that studios have managed to bring in, courtesy of the video on demand era. The more things change, folks, the more in their own little way they stay the same. And that brings me to the end of this latest episode of Film Stories. As always, thank you so much for listening and thank you for your time. If I've not bored you completely, you can find me on Instagram, simon.brew, Blue Sky, Simon Brew. You can find Film Stories on Blue Sky at Film Stories, on Instagram, Film Stories Magazine UK, youtube.com/Film Stories, facebook.com/Film Stories Online, and then our online shop, store.filmstories.co.uk, where you can find all of our print magazines for sale, as well as our UK exclusive Blu-rays of No Way Out and Bull Durham. And then on top of that, an assortment of unofficial movie merchandise as well. Some more things coming too, as well as the new issue of the magazine. Filmstories.co.uk, meanwhile, is our clickbait-free and AI-free entertainment website. It feels really weird saying that you have to point that out. But we do point it out, and we're continuing to bang the drum there against a very odd, big tech-dominated universe. Thank you, as always, to everyone who supports us. Most important thing, as always, is you all stay safe and well. And thank you so much for listening. I'm off to watch another load of films now. I'll be back soon with another episode of Film Stories. Until then, take care, look after yourselves, stay safe, and bye-bye. Bye, folks. And then just for a little post-credits bit on the podcast, thank you for all the notes of support that people have been sending in. I've had some really lovely messages, which makes sense if you listen to like the last few times I've put some messages out after the podcast is finished. Please know that they're read and they're appreciated, and it's been a less bumpy week, touch wood, but I'm almost scared to say that out loud. And now deadlines closing in on new issues of magazines and live shows. I'm frantically trying to bang the drum and spread the word of Film Stories. So thankfully, and this is joyous in itself, no dramatic update to put at the end of this podcast. Just a thank you. Back soon.